As Sydney drew closer, her footsteps echoing through the silence. She expected to find someone lurking in the shadows, but instead she was met with an unsettling emptiness. The spot was deserted, devoid of any sign of life. Sydney's gaze darted around, her senses on high alert. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was hiding behind the staircase. Shrugging off the unease, she proceeded to check on Mr. Volt. As she exited the living room, Daniel snuck into his new room, his chest heaving with stifled laughter. "That was close," he mumbled, still grinning. But his amusement was short-lived. A nagging question crept into his mind. "Why is it a big deal if Sydney discovers me?" Daniel's expression darkened, his eyes glinted with mischief. "Actually, it's better this way. The anticipation is exhilarating." He posed, his smile faltering. "What's the worst that could happen?" He savored the thought of Sydney's reaction when finally uncovers that she lives under the same roof with the guy who almost knocked her and her friend out and took off without a word. The look on her face will be priceless. He smiled, brushing his hair with a side grin. Daniel's eyes widened as he suspected Mr. Votes might mention him to Sydney. He swiftly sent a text. "Don't tell Sydney about me yet." Mr. Volt's phone beeped and he smiled upon reading the message. "I was just about to ask Sydney if you two have met," he thought, deciding to keep Daniel's little request. "Is everything okay, Mr. Volt?" Sydney asked, noticing his brief distraction. Her curious gaze searched his eyes. "Nothing serious," he replied, swiftly changing the subject. "My latest invention is nearing completion. The prototype is semi-finished." Sydney's expression transformed, excitement sparkling in her eyes. Hope rekindled. Perhaps her mysterious situation could be resolved. A heartfelt smile spread across her face. She rushed to Mr. Volt, wrapping him in a tight hug. "Thank you, Mr. Volt," she murmured, her voice gentle and filled with gratitude. Mr. Volt's expression softened, returning the hug. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Sydney." Daniel paced, wondering if he was too late. Had Mr. Volt already revealed his secret to Sydney? Just then Sydney exited the room, her smile still radiant from Mr. Volt's promising news. Once she was out of earshot, Mr. Volt pulled out his phone and replied to Daniel's message. "I don't know what you're up to, but okay." He sent the text, a bit of curiosity and amusement dancing in his eyes. Daniel's phone buzzed. He sighed in relief, reading Mr. Volt's response. His secrets was safe for now. Daniel sighed, his tense shoulders relaxing. "That was close," he muttered to himself. The night wore on, its darkness mirroring Sydney's eternal vigilance while others slumbered. She remained wide awake, a habit forged over the years of necessity. The weight of her mysterious past bore down on her. No one knew her secrets, and she knew no one who could unravel the tangled threads of her history. The uncertainty had become a constant campaign, fueling her wakefulness. But now the glimmer of hope flickered. Mr. Volt's revolutionary device promised to change everything. It will allow her to sleep, while remaining awake, freeing her from the exhausting cycle. The Sanyan, Mr. Volt called it, gateway to rest without surrendering control. Sydney's thoughts clung to the possibility. Could this device truly ground her beast she'd lost? Would it safeguard her secrets while she slumbered? The morning light flooded the neighborhood. Sydney opened her window and her heart skipped a beat. Lucas stood by the window in the neighboring apartment, his gaze locked on hers. Was she dreaming? Sydney's cheeks flushed. Does he live here now? The possibility of being Mrs. Lucas sent her mind racing. Lucas' eyes met hers, and he smiled. Sydney's stomach fluttered with butterflies. Does she live here? Luca wondered, his eyes crinkling at the corners. Sydney's blush deepened as Lucas' gaze held hers, the distance between them feeling suddenly smaller. Sydney burst into her room, phone already in hand. She dialed Jeanette's number, barely containing her excitement. Jeanette's groggy voice answered. "Hello. Luca lives in my neighborhood," Sydney bloated. Jeanette's yawn was audible. Seriously, this couldn't wait until school, Jeanette whined, rubbing her eyes. Sydney ignores Jeanette's grumpiness. I saw him this morning. He's literally in my neighborhood. Jeanette's tone shifted from annoyance to intrigue. Spew. What happened? At school, Sydney's Luca daydreaming was interrupted by a familiar figure. Her eyes widened in surprise. Recalling yesterday's skateboard incident, Blonde, she said, recognizing Daniel. Sydney said. Jeanette followed her gaze. Annoyance edge on her face. You. Daniel smiled, thinking she has a bad impression of me. Can't wait to see your expression when you learn that this guy will be living with you in the same roof. Jeanette crossed her hands. You go to our school. How unlucky. Just then a classmate whispered, be careful around him, he's got influence. Some kid challenged him earlier, and now that kid's expelled. First day and already making waves. Huh? Sydney's eyes narrowed. Intrigued. Daniel's smile never wavered. Before Sydney could say another word, the school bell rang, signaling the start of class. Students scrambled to gather their belongings. Saved by the bell, Daniel thought, his eyes flicking to Sydney before leaving to class. At lunch, Sydney's gaze drifted to Luca laughing with his friends across the cafeteria. Her heart skipped a beat, just as she was mustering the courage to approach him. Daniel appeared, his eyes locked on the table. Jeanette groaned. Sydney rolled her eyes. Seriously, I just lost my appetite. Daniel smiled, mischievously taking a seat. I mean, our other tables around, Sydney said firmly, trying hard not to overreact. But this one's better, he said, smiling. Jeanette's annoyance flared. Of course you think that. Sydney's frustration simmered. What do you want, Blondie? Daniel's eyes lingered on Sydney before responding. Just enjoying the view and company. His words hung in the air, infuriating Sydney and Jeanette further. Later, after the basketball game, Sydney's frustration shimmered. Daniel's impressive skills on the court only amplified her annoyance. His constant interference with Luca's play grated on her nerves. Determined to shake off her irritation, Sydney puts on a bright smile and approached Luca. Hey, congrats on the game. Here's some water, she offered, smiling. But before Luca responded, Leah swooped in, offering her own bottle. I've got this, Sydney. Luca accepted Leah's water, and Sydney's face fell just as she turned to leave. Luca took her bottle too. Thanks, he said, smiling. I'll drink this later when I'm thirsty. No worries, she said, blushing. Sydney's disappointment transformed into a warm smile. Leah rolled her eyes, tugging Luca away. Whatever, she said, smiling. Sydney watched them leave, still feeling the pleasant chill of Luca's acknowledgement. Meanwhile, Daniel observed the exchange, a knowing smile spreading across his face. Sydney's got it bad for Luca, he smirked.